Thank you so much for actually taking the time to come and spend some time and try to learn a little more about the decision I made in creating this story. We are at a pivotal point in American history. We are at the creation of the third, maybe the fourth, I'm going to call it the third, central bank. The second bank of the United States, the first bank of the United States, set up by Hamilton. The second bank of the United States, set up by Madison as a response to the enormous debt he incurred during the War of 1812. In 1906, a gentleman comes from Germany who had already a central bank, and he's an expert in central banking. His name is Paul Warburg, a name that you probably never heard of. The last time I saw that name, believe it or not, I was in New York City, and I'm working with my wife, and an enormous building was being built. I bet you every developer, every huge banker know Paul Warburg and the Warburg Bank. Warburg Bank was a bank in Frankfurt during the Second World War, so this is kind of the information I had. This man comes in and starts working slowly at setting up the Federal Reserve Bank, which at this point has no name, but they want to implement a central bank in America. He works for a company called Kuhn, Loeb and Company. He was married with, I think, Loeb. And so he works on it, and it takes years, and people are like, oh, we have a crisis in 1907, again, contraction, credit contraction, and so they try to figure out a way to set up a central bank. I found out that they could not come up with a place where JP Morgan, all these leaders of the banks could actually go, because there were people following them. You know, paparazzi we think of today, we didn't think of, 1910 they had paparazzi, and JP Morgan could not go anywhere, so they decide, all these people in cahoots, to set up a central bank. Let's get out here, let's set it up, let's make a huge plan, and we'll use this plan to try to pass a law. So they bring a senator called Senator Aldrich, Paul Warburg, who basically is the expert, and he was called the father of the Federal Reserve. If you are my age and you lived in America, I'm sure you remember you heard the name Daddy Warburg. Well, that was after him. That was after Paul Warburg. They go to a private resort island owned by JP Morgan called Jekyll Island. And they say, oh, this is perfect. We'll just go over there. We'll do all the planning. We'll talk. We'll figure out. But we got to keep this under wrap. This has to be secret. So they disguise themselves. They disguise, I think, as duck hunters. Get on the train owned by JP Morgan in Hoboken. But they go to New Jersey, get on the train, and go all the way to Georgia to this private resort owned by JP Morgan, and stay, I think, for like 10 days, and start working the plan for a central bank, an American central bank. Because remember, we're not talking Germany, France, we're talking an enormous country. And so, Senator from Rhode Island, Aldrich, is there. The people from the National City Bank, which is, I think, Citibank now. JP Morgan Company was represented. A gentleman called Davison came in JP Morgan stead, and Benjamin Strong, the future governor of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and many others. Their objective became the foundation of the Federal Reserve. They come back, they try to pass a law. I think it was in 1910 they did that. It took 3 years, some adjustment, but in 1913, on December 23rd, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson pushed and manipulated into believing this is a great idea by someone I will talk about further down in this book, signed the Federal Reserve Act, and the Federal Reserve is implemented. So this is what I learned, and one of the really tiny little elements, a little fact, what I learned is that when Paul Warburg died, his family say he died of a broken heart because he was let go at the Federal Reserve because he was German, even though he was a naturalized American citizen, and there was a war with the German and yada yada yada. He was kicked out. He died of a broken heart, and I'm like, no. This is not possible. So how do I tell the story? And I use this to say, I cannot believe a man that smart, that brilliant, that amazing would be so heartbroken being moved from the Federal Reserve. Yes, he was, I'm sure, disappointed. I'm sure he was let down. But I gave him, and if you read the story, and if you didn't, please, you may not want to keep going. You may want to read the story before. I turn it into a real love story that would justify him dying of a broken heart. And I found a love story that would, with someone of his caliber, mentally, he was married, he had kids, but everybody had affairs at the time. And he has this affair with this brilliant woman, and again, her name is Elsa. They just completely fall in love, and I use their connection, both economists. She works for a gentleman named the Copper King, who bought and built the most expensive mansion ever built at the time on Fifth Avenue in New York City. He was a Copper King. He made his fortune. And she works for him as an advisor because he could not believe how smart she was and decided, you know what, I'm hiring her. And so they can exchange. You have that intellect that's so far superior that she can talk to him. And so I use this relationship and this exchange to share, oh, well, what do you think of this and what do you think of that, and so on and so forth. A tragic event happens, and now we learn that actually Paul Warburg had grave concern, not only about the people that he worked with to set up this bank and their greed, but also as time goes on about this 1929 crash that he foresaw. And so I used that, and I said, well, he foresaw, and this is true. I basically take all these events that I learned, and okay, I do this, I do it, and I, scotch step them. And then I finally find a thread that says, oh, this could work. This could work. And he died of a broken heart. And, there's a lot of poetry in this story. There's a lot of love in this story. There's a lot of incredible event about our history, about American history, about what happened, and the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the central bank and the system of 12 central banks that we are still dealing with. And I love that story. I think I talk about music, I talk about poetry, I talk about love, I talk about, it's very romantic, but it lays out some serious concern about what we're dealing with. And so I hope you get to read this story. I hope that if you have a question, please reach out. I am not an expert. I read and I studied. But all these are true events. And I hope you enjoy the Father of the Federal Reserve, the chapter we're discussing in The Kings Have Won. I want to thank you for your time and hope to see you on the next one.